Norris, and glad you're back with us. Today we wanted to talk about a few topics. First off, kind of a macro level, our healthcare crisis, if you will, obesity epidemic and all of the such, but breaking that down into potentially some applications and maybe even simple solutions of what you could do to fight that. Doesn't really involve governmental aid and help. Starts with you. But anyway, Keith, we learned through, not to keep beating it up, but Project Transformation, that, there are some very simple interventions, if you will, that people can do, and it will drastically improve and change their health. So maybe talk about that and again, some of the applications towards maybe a more macro level of healthcare.
Sure. I mean, this is healthcare is a huge problem with a very, very easy fix. It's simple fix. If we could just get the nation's mind around the idea of, first and foremost, without getting into a dietary argument, one thing that people across the board can agree on, that simple carbohydrates, especially sugars, if we just started with that one step and eliminated that would go a long way towards moving us past the healthcare crisis on the dietary front. And that's not even to get into the whole, we ascribe to the paleo diet, but I'm more interested in bringing everybody on board, vegetarians, vegans, everybody on board, and I think everybody can agree on the fact that we need to get rid of sugars, especially high fructose corn syrup. It's one of those things where that's the 80-20 rule. If we were just to take that one simple step, eliminate that, on the dietary front, we would make huge gains in the healthcare crisis, eliminating that. The next thing, obviously, is a little bit of exercise. It doesn't take a whole lot. We showed that with Project Transformation. 1 hour a week. I mean, it's not all that complicated. It's very easy to do. And if we could get the nation's mindset around that as well, to devote 1 hour a week to exercise. I totally understand how we got where we are today, and I totally understand the past generations, how it was the idea that if you didn't put forth any physical effort, if you didn't have to exert yourself, that meant that you had made it, that you are, you're not working the fields, you're not, doing this manual labor, that kind of stuff. But we really have to come into a new paradigm here and think that we've pretty much all made it at this point. Many people have made it. Now we've made it to the point that we're killing ourselves. So now we need to backtrack, and if we lead sedentary lives, which most people do, then we need to get that hour of good high-intensity exercise and then kind of just pepper in the activities, the bike riding, the walking, the gardening, all these other things in the mix, and healthcare crisis eliminated. I mean, seriously, that is it. That is all it takes. We don't even need Washington for that. Just bypass Washington completely. Start with the person in the mirror, and you can take care of it. It's save a lot of money along the way too, by the way.
It's interesting how we have such wealth so as to be burdened by this.
Absolutely.
Right. It's effectively, by having wealth, it enables everything from liberal arts education to actually being able to ask what is the good life and what is it to ascribe to that. And you can't ask that if you're just clawing, tooth and nail to survive. So it's a weird problem to have. It's sort of like the person who's a multimillionaire and complaining about everything they have to deal with. And you're not that person. You're going, oh yeah, I'd like to have your problems. Well, sure. Different. You have problems at every level of wealth and things you didn't even realize you'd have. What's that? It's a classic rock song. Everybody's so different. I haven't changed.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's kind of what it is. It's sort of our wealth brings, as its collective society, has brought this problem, and it's just a strange one to deal with.
Well, not only wealth, but abundance.
Yes.
We've never had. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've never had to deal with having so much, for now more than a generation, and we're paying for it. So yeah,
it's kind of the physical side of the mental grist for the mill idea. So many societies that are just hanging on tooth and nail, that are very labor intensive, not a whole lot of need for therapists and psychiatrists. You know, then you come to an affluent society where you have plenty of time. Now you have grist for the mill. Now you have a need for that kind of thing. So it's, you know, kind of the same idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's the stuff, my wife has spent a lot of time, she spent a year in Ecuador teaching English, and she's also spent time in rural Argentina, and this past summer we spent a lot of time traveling around Panama and Costa Rica, and yeah, sort of she would talk about, like, if Daisy, her host mother, when she was in Ecuador, you know, saw some of the stuff here in America, like, why is your dog wearing a sweater, kind of thing? Like, are you kidding me? Kind of, you're throwing out what, you know? And she was as happy as they came, you know. So it's that perspective, and yeah, you don't have grist for the mill. She got to get up and make a yogurt because that's what they sold to the tourists, and so just doing it. There was a dog with a bone, like you'd say. There was a set of things that had to be done, otherwise they weren't going to survive. It was very simple.
Yeah, and it's not historically stepping back too far. It's just stepping back a couple generations, really.
Yeah. It's not a It's not the recreation that Rob Wolf talked about. The Civil War.
Sure. Yeah, it's the framework, not the recreation.
Right. Yeah. Technology in itself is not a bad thing, but just apply it to not making an abundance of crap food. Maybe apply it some other ways. But yeah. Well, I think last EETV we definitely got onto a hypertrophy discussion, and not to, again, keep beating that up, but, you know, to go into it a little bit more. I think it's good to know, I think we also alluded to Skyler's journey, if you will, and, you know, finding out kind of what your genetic potential is. Casey Butt has a website, weighttrainer.net. I have one T in the middle of that. Skyler has used this and ran the numbers on himself and us, and it's very interesting. Skyler just talked a little bit more about that.
Sure. You know, and we have to beat this to a dead horse because people like Fred Haas will keep saying that we can talk. We can work out in less than 20 minutes, but we can talk forever. And that,
especially caffeinated. So
caffeinated. These guys, I'm going to take them out. But so Casey Butt writes this book. It's basically determining your genetic muscular potential. And it came out of this notion, if you read sort of the introduction, that, you know, he's thinking he's not very muscular. And guys are saying, man, look at you, your arms are great, you know, so on. And he sort of got scratching his head like, well, these guys say they weigh this much, and yet they claim this size of arm, or whatever, right? It's like the bench press. That's the metric, even though there's so many more metrics with which can be measured. And he measures all metrics, but I mean, if it's guys talking to guys, what's your arm, what's your bench? And talking about, if you weigh this much, your arm shouldn't be this big. In other words, a pound of my muscle is going to weigh as much as a pound of Keith's muscle. So, you know, I don't have a bigger arm than Keith because I weigh less than Keith, and we're both reasonably lean, and then you factor in bone structure and so on and so forth. And so Casey, who has a PhD in artificial intelligence, spent 6 years researching the science, comparing some of the formulas that have come out of science, because they've done, exercise physiologists have done studies on this, typically taking college students and determining, or attempting to determine based on this population what a maximum fat-free mass could be, and comparing it to steroid users and what their maximum fat-free mass tends to be, and teasing out a formula from this. So he sort of took all of these formulas and married them in such a way that the regressions were consistent with pre-steroid bodybuilders, basically the Reg Parks, John Grimmicks, Clancy Rosses. We're talking 1940s, and we had accurate measurements from them, and can marry that. And then also you could marry then, he then through other regressions figured out like freak formulas, like here would be the maximum possible at this structure anybody with perfect genetics and a lot of anabolic assistance could achieve. And even then, they're not going to achieve it on every body part. I think he shows that for Bill Kazmaier, that the only thing that was a freak measurement that actually beat this number was his neck, right? And strongmen's necks start like Bill Goldberg, you know, the wrestler. So somewhere up here, the traps begin to mountain down. But everything else, even with the anabolic assistance and the fact that he probably had 9-inch wrists and all these other things that are very favorable for being strong, he still wasn't able to surpass these numbers. So taking all of the, even has the old Greek formulas, like just built into a simple plug and play, taking the golden number, the golden ratio, and applying it to the human body as the Greeks did. So he does all this work, and he says he worked harder on this than he did on his, like I said, artificial intelligence PhD. Use it to your advantage, because the funny bit is that he says he's gotten actual like hate mail and really aggressive mail saying, "You're a damn liar, I'm going to totally beat these numbers." But then you start comparing, and this is what I did, and then it was brought to my attention too. I talked about how you gain a lot when you first start working out, and this gradually sort of becomes the long tail. Dorian Yates, in his 15 years of bodybuilding with anabolic assistance, gained something like 70 pounds, which is 5 pounds a year. A lot more up in front, a lot less on the tail end. And that's what Casey Butt's saying, and he could probably even take the formula and make Dorian will fit it probably within 5% either way at his peak. So that's what it is, and then we plug our numbers in, and they sort of fit. He has a hard gainer measurement, which he actually defines mathematically, as opposed to sort of, I don't gain 1,000 pounds in a month, I must be a hard gainer, like this emotional measurement, to wrist and ankle size as it correlates to your height, right? And that number is 95% roughly of the maximum muscular potential. And so it sort of also became this discussion too. It seems like you can get there pretty easy to this. I say pretty easy, you're going to work your butt off, but it's not. You can get to that 95%, and then getting that last 5% is going to take an investment far above another 5% work. It's the 80-20 rule, kind of applied to a physique. So at least that's what we determined, just sort of between ourselves.
Yeah, and just for another reference point for people watching, you can play with these numbers and get your own numbers by purchasing Casey's $10 ebook. Is that?
That's correct.
And his ebook
He has
titled,
it is your maximum muscular potential.
Okay.
And there's a little bit more to it than that. But if you go to the website, it's the first thing that pops up in a couple other updates.
Yeah.
You can play with that. And he has a couple calculators on there too, everything from metabolic rate to maximum possible strength. I mean, just lots of really smart stuff in an easily presented way.
So kind of the freakonomics of physical culture.
Kind of in a way. I mean, it's certainly
taking math behind.
Yeah. Lots of math.
Yeah. I don't know if I talked to Keith about this earlier, if there might be other possible formulas that maybe I'm the one unaware of that haven't been explored yet. One thing that my father-in-law, who screens athletes when they come into Texas A&M University, always talks about, well, one, you can just tell when an athlete walks in the door, someone that's not going to be as good of an athlete. But another interesting thing that he always notes with speed, you can't always teach speed, right? But there's some ratio I'm confident of that we could look at with ankle size and calf length that's going to dictate, is this kid going to be fast or not? And I don't know if there's really been anything done to that degree other than observation. But
and observation is huge. I mean, if you've been involved in athletics for a long period of time, and I have, you can look at a kid and you just know. My thing was football. You can look at a kid and know there's a speed position right there. Now, whether he has hands or not, I don't know. He's going to be a wide receiver, defensive back, running back. That might be debatable, but you definitely can look, and it doesn't even have to. It can be from the knees down, and you could just look and see that's a speed position kid right there. Bam, kind of filter them a bit, and I mean young too. We're not talking high school age. I mean young. Pop Warner age even, and it's I mean, you can totally without even. I mean, you can already start grouping these kids in your mind when you see them kind of filtering in. You've been at it long enough, and it plays out every time. The short calf, long Achilles, usually, and small ankles, you've got a speed kid on your hands right there. And it really, and Mark and I was talking about this earlier, calves being one of the most genetically prone muscles in the body. You can't really, you've either got it or you don't. And it's one of those muscles that you can train forever. Your twin brother who never trains at all, you might get a quarter inch on him. in a lifetime of bodybuilding training.
That's
so it's
I think
very
it's Chris
genetic.
Dickerson and Sergio. Sergio actually talked about his brother's arms. He said, the guy just cut sugarcane in Cuba, and he was
Yep.
very powerful. And it was Chris Dickerson who was known for his calves. He said his brother, sat at a desk and had great calves, and it was just. And the other side of the point, talking about the speed position, it's Sean Crawford. He's a 200-meter sprinter for 200-meter American sprinter, and the guy very muscular in chest, shoulders, traps, arms, spindly little calves,
Sure.
and he flat out tells you, he goes, these guys, I could gain strength for days on this. They've almost not grown at all. And from my own personal experience, like no matter how strong my calves were, no matter how high I was jumping, they were never really changing in size. And that was actually what I was going to bring up. What you sent me with regards to the article from Kelly Baggett about that's 90% of the time the calves are pretty determinate, and then you have the occasional Yahoo who wakes up fast and they have like strongman calves that the insertion point is about the big toe, and that's correct. Yeah, just enormous calves, and they don't look like they would be fast guys based on those kind of light bone, high calf for potential energy storing potential look. So
Yeah.
So one other thing we touched on was the muscle in a calf muscle, especially being a reservoir of like a capacitor to draw a correlation of electricity, but being an energy storage device. And there's some quality to muscle, and it has to do with the fast twitch muscle. Maybe, I don't know, but there's some quality opposed to just straight out muscle fiber quality. There's another Q quality involved there that is a storage potential, or a storage and rapid release potential that's involved, and that would be a great area of study, Skyler, to figure out what that quality is.
Yeah.
Well, and I did see a study referenced again. I know there was a study previously done at the University of Texas, because I can remember studying it when I went to the University of Texas, that compared black and white athletes, and I know it got a lot of negative feedback. And I know that I was kind of out there searching for something along those lines. I did come across a more recent one. I think it was within the last 10 years. But they did do a comparison. Again, you said that you can look at the knees down. That's literally what they did. They looked at basically the structures below the knee, and you had alluded to the qualities. They came up with 3 qualities that there were actually differences in black and white athletes. In the muscle, there wasn't much tendon difference, which a lot of people think, well, it's the Achilles. It's got to be some kind of added spring there for that guy that's faster. But it really came down to 3 qualities of the muscle. Elasticity was kind of the big one, viscosity, and stiffness. And there was actually if you want to say, there were more of those 3 qualities in the black athletes that they measure versus the white athletes that they measure.
it's interesting you mentioned stiffness, because I was, as I explained to clients about just mobility and flexibility, if you look at some of the studies done on runners in general, the ones who are most stiff are the ones who are fastest, but they are also the most injury prone. Like their economy is really, really good because by nature they can't be loosey-goosey. It's sort of like when you start weight training, if you're a trainer or you've ever trained someone out there, if you start someone out and they're light, they do all sorts of weird stuff with their limbs that once the weight is loaded, they stop doing because they literally can't do it. It forces them to pick the best economy of motion. Never mind that when you get too heavy, you introduce a whole host of other things that is actually attempting to improve your leverage economy. But that's another discussion. But the point is that these people are so tight that their groove was so set that if they drifted outside of it even a little bit, which when you're running, it's not this mental process, it's almost a reactive process, they have the greatest potential for injury as a result of that. But that stiffness would speed making sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd never thought of the stiffness either. It does make sense of, that guy's got springs or whatever. Mm-hmm. There's some kind of elasticity quality, but the stiffness I'd never really thought about either. Mm-hmm. And that was that third characteristic that they mentioned. Interesting. Then it kind of dawned on me, my father-in-law, who was a sprinter in his day, his daughters make fun of him because he's barely bending over at the waist. I'm like, Dad, what are you doing? I'm stretching. So it's kind of one of those, I really do. It's a quality I never really considered. But yeah, usually fast athletes are also stiff, if you want to say that.
Yeah.
You don't really see a lot of sprinters in yoga.
But you do have certainly the exceptions. I can think of talking not exactly the same, but Dante, the inventor of the infamous DC or dog crap weight training system, he said his observations were that the biggest bodybuilders were also the most flexible, and it makes me think of Kevin Levrone, or Levrone, or however his last name is pronounced, because hitting there are all these black and white pictures you can pull up of him hitting side splits before bodybuilding competitions, but then his big claim to fame was that he was really a fast sprinter. He was one of those guys who were I'll run against college sprinters and show you that, I'm fast. Kind of like the old, we got photos of Menser doing sprints in the old NBC, Stars versus the Athletes or whatever.
That's right.
And
Herschel Walker's another
Herschel
good
Walker.
example. I mean,
Real fast, yeah.
super flexible.
Well, I think you can train for flexibility more than you can train for speed.
Right. Right, but it's I wonder if the stiffness is a component, but I wonder if then improving your sort of voluntary flexibility, people might assume saying, if stiffness is a component, then you don't want to be flexible. Yeah. That's not what this is saying.
Yeah, and I guess also too, in the other study that I couldn't find, I looked for, they had the kind of posterior chain differences in black and white athletes, and if stiffness in this latter study that I mentioned is really just talking about this stiffness. I'm not sure if the camera picked that up. Calf stiffness, and so that has nothing to do with doing the splits or anything like that. So, and of course, I think people are different fibers across their body. They're not all fast twitch everywhere.
Sure.
And I guess this kind of gets into, I think you had said something with the 95-5 or the 80-20 rule, whatever you want to say, but Keith had a good post on Theory of Practice, I guess that was this last week, I think Keith thinks in diagrams, but
it's a scary place.
But he had kind of the diagram of unhealthy and unathletic, and then as they kind of progress, as you get healthier and you get more athletic, just kind of discuss that kind of performance. Maybe I think is how you used it, performance and health continuum.
Sure, and this kind of goes along with what Skyler was talking about, muscular potential. That we can get so much of that 80% done in a short period of time. But then to go beyond that requires a huge investment in time. And whether you're talking about bodybuilding, hypertrophy for hypertrophy's sake, in a bodybuilding sense, or if you're talking about athletic performance, the time investment becomes exponential for each little increment that we're going up to get better and better and better. Backtracking off of that, if you're talking about taking somebody from 0 to healthy, that an hour a week is pretty much what, and I'm not saying these are any studies that have been done. I don't have any studies to back anything up. This is just observational evidence, and this is just how I kind of piece together this stuff in my mind about how this goes. So we can get a huge onset, a huge gain from a little bit of time investment, and that's what I would call going from 0 to healthy. Now, if you want to go a little bit beyond that, if you want to increase performance a little bit better, better body composition, better athletic performance, however that's measured, however you decide to measure that, a little bit more time investment, but that's not necessarily going to increase your health. Your health is not made better by you being a better performing athlete or a more muscular bodybuilder. You reach a certain point and healthy is healthy, there's not super healthy. Now back when I was young in the Bruce Jenner days, wow, really dating myself there, but
hey, you didn't keep the hair from that day. He still does.
So my mindset as a kid was, obviously those guys out in the 76 Olympics, those are the healthiest human beings in the world. That's exactly who I want to be. I want to be super healthy. Little did I know that they were just basket casing, not across the board, but their health severely suffered, and any top-level athlete has to give up a little bit on the health side. Otherwise, you're never going to get to the top-level athlete. It just has to be that way. So backtracking off of that, you can still get a little bit of performance gain, a little bit of hypertrophy gain, and not be detrimental to your health, but you're not going to add to your health. There's a certain point where there's a Faustian bargain. Do I want to go kind of over the Rubicon over here and really chase performance or really chase hypertrophy? I've got to say to myself, well, health is not going to be my number one concern. It just has to be that way, because you have to do things to your body to get you past that point that's going to be detrimental to your health. Whether it's internal, whether it's orthopedic health, something's going to suffer to push yourself past that point, and that's oxidative stress on the body. I mean, there's a whole host of things that we can get into, and everybody, I think, needs to pick that goal. Do I want to be healthy? Do I want to invest the time just to get me to a good performance and a healthy point? Do I want to push it a little bit more, invest a little bit more time, and increase my performance a little bit more? Or do I want to take that Faustian bargain and move over to that side? Personally, I kind of ride that edge right at where I'm not being detrimental to my health, and I'm pretty much as much performance as I'm going to get without being detrimental to my health. Every now and again, I'll just get a wild hair, and I'll really want to push performance. But I know that I'm giving up some health, and I keep a monitor on that, and I'll back off when I see indicators of my health deteriorating past the point that I'm really willing to give up.
This makes me think of a few things. Pendlay, super gnarly Texan Olympic lifting dynamo. He had I guess one of the things it was one of his graduate papers where he wrote about the Pendlay hormonal manipulation model, and he'd effectively slog a person, gradually increasing volume and intensity up to a period of, I think it was a 6-week model, or it could even stretch it out to 10, but you started at relatively low volume and intensity, and eventually you went up to over the Rubicon, or up to the top of the Rubicon, where you were just trying to, they're training every day, they're slogging these people, and then you gradually back off the intensity. And this was all with the intent that once you backed off and then actually really backed off, then your body's hormonal sort of state would rebound to a level above where it would normally hang out, right? It's almost like glycogen supercompensation at the glandular level. And so with the intent that your hormones are going to peak at the meet.
Yep.
So you've got everything as locked in as possible. So that's one. Number two, it makes me think of hormesis. There's a blog, Getting Stronger. I forget the name of the gentleman who writes it, but he talks about hormesis, which is gradually exposing yourself to stressors at low levels to get stronger. Everything from wearing reverse prescription glasses to actually improve your vision, to fasting, which there's an element of health in the fasting. That is, you are providing you're providing a sort of an irritant to the body, and with the intent that then it responds better over time, right? That's what weight training is. It's a stimulus response. So hormesis is that. And then he also talked about how antioxidants might actually be a hormetic response, not something that, anyway. And this makes me think of some of for a lot of people, the Project Transformation was this compared to the rest of their life, right? Yep. They couldn't sustain the level of intensity, certainly by the end, as you were asking of some of those people who were willing to go get that bone. But in the short term, their bodies responded fantastically, and then they back off into something a little bit more normal, and then periodically they might be able to re-enter, just like you said, surge, blitz into it, if you don't want to use Weider and or IR terminology. Blitz, really push yourself almost to the verge of overreaching, back off, and you might get a little bit more health out of it, maybe. I mean, there's really, you'll get some more performance out of it, maybe a tiny bit more health, but...
Yeah, well, and I think some people's feedback mechanism becomes an injury oftentimes. In other words, they're reaching until something happens. Oh, crap. Yeah. Now you're forced
Surgery is the time to back off.
Yeah.
Because you have muscle relaxants.
Just tape it up.
Just tape it up.
Yeah, I mean, so I think...
Paul Walker in Varsity Blues, give him another shot of Novocaine, tape the knee up. We need you, QB.
So I think in the real world applications of reaching, a lot of people are halted at some point from injury.
Sure,
Now, true, I think if you're really dialed in, maybe, at some point, like for bodybuilders, it's usually just age. At some point, they're like, I gotta, throw it in. I throw in that towel, I'm done. But you can kind of know that balance a little bit better. And I think, Keith, you're a great example of that. I mean, hey, I can push it, but if I do this, it's, sorry, your knees are gone or whatever it is, so. And it also reminds me of the sports car analogy, but, with cars, it's, you can tweak performance and really get it up there. But reliability, in other words, health, is going to go down. Your car, if it's really tricked out and, all this whatnot, and it's super fast, it's probably going to, be up on blocks a lot too. It's going to be in the shop. You're not going to have a very reliable car.
Well, it's like Top Fuel funny cars, NASCAR, Formula One. Actually more Formula One kart recently. They said your engine has to last 3 races or what have you. But for that reason, they were working on the tattered edge. Top Fuel funny car, they rebuild the engine every run. Every single run, these guys are tearing down and rebuilding this engine because when you're pumping that much boost and nitro into the engine to just, if you're traveling a quarter mile on a rocket, you got to rebuild that rocket every time. And actually, I have a cardiologist who talks about, as he learned in a very early age. This is related to Kurt Harris's post about lots and lots of cardio, basically marathon runners being more prone to heart damage than sedentary people. There's a good example. Running a marathon is you left health behind a long time ago. And there are some studies to bear this out. And the way that this cardiologist client of mine put it, he said very early in his career he learned this because he had someone cranking away on a stress test and just crushing it. And then 2 days later, the guy was out on a run and died of a massive heart attack. He was one of those guys who could almost Dean Karnazes or whatever his name is. This guy who ran 50 marathons in 50 states and so in 50 days.
Yeah, I was going to say in no time at all.
In no time at all. I mean, it's just that edge is. There's not much of it left before everything falls apart. And so.
That, I guess it's a long-winded way of just saying that you really need to assess your goals. Where do you want to be? Do you want to be a competitive athlete? You're going to have to give up. You're going to have to, first of all, you're going to have to invest a lot of time. That's number one. And you're going to have to be cognizant of your health. If that really matters to you, you're going to give up a little bit on that end. And that's, whenever I go back and reassess goals, or I have people assess their goals for the first time, that's a good thing to think about. Where do you want to fall on this continuum? Do you want to just be healthy and just have the minimum? I mean, that's a fine place for 90% of the population. That's kind of the project transformation population. That doesn't take a whole lot. Now, if you want to move beyond, then now you're playing with some different variables there. But it's good to be cognizant of it. And the big thing that I want to push across, especially to young kids, is to not. There's a lot of reasons to emulate an athlete, but because you think they are examples of the healthiest person out there, that's not a reason to emulate, because they're sacrificing quite a bit to be in that position. And I'm all for that. I mean, I would never take anything away from a competitive athlete. I was myself, and I am totally down with the drive and the focus and the mental energy and the gutsiness that it takes. But just be cognizant of what you're giving up on the other end.
It's essentially abuse during competitive years.
Sure, it is.
Man, and you look at he's local here, Earl Campbell. You see that guy basically in a wheelchair, barely walking. He was a stud in his day, but I mean, look at him now. And true, that has to do with the actual playing of football as well as probably the training. But even you just take any athlete today. I mean, what is he going to be like in 20, 30 years? So
yeah.
Well, I think that's about it for this time. We enjoyed it and hope you did too. And we will see you then. Bye.